Yeah, I'm here fitting in for Will Micke. I think you saw in the program maybe. Unfortunately, couldn't make it. He's an investor in Bloomwell also, so he asked us to fill the slot and talk a bit about what we do in Germany. Maybe advance what you've heard so far in these last 2 days, because we're going to talk a little bit more also on how we run a large medical cannabis telemedicine platform in Germany, actually largest in Europe. So we'll do a brief overview on I know you heard regulatory already. I just want to focus on the parts that are important from a medical perspective. For me as a doctor, when we built Algea Care as a treatment platform, and then we're going to dive into a little bit on what we do as at Bloomwell, really thinking the patient journey towards the end, not just looking at treatment, but looking at where do you get the medication from, and how can this whole process be done in a very quick time, because I think that's an entry barrier actually to becoming a cannabis patient in Germany or Europe or elsewhere. If it's too tedious, takes too much time, too many entry barriers, I think that has a big impact on actually starting with that type of treatment. So you heard that already, I think, especially from the colleagues, from the legal colleagues yesterday. The situation in Germany is pretty straightforward. We have a law that allows doctors to treat with medical cannabis since 2017, so a little bit more than 6 years now. There's different types of products and regulatory aspects. We're focusing with our treatment platform particularly on treatment with flowers and also extracts, but not Sativex and others. What's crucial is to really differentiate between what are the regulatory implications for a doctor to treat a patient and what are the implications when it comes to reimbursement, because those tend to be thrown together into a mixed bag, but they're actually separate. So from a medical perspective, to treat a patient in Germany, and I think that's also valid increasingly in the whole European Union, there's no defined catalog. There's no catalog on those conditions or diseases can be treated, those cannot. It's really up to the doctor. Also meaning you have to look at each case individually. Legally speaking, and that's that. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's that part down here. There's 3 main criteria to at least consider cannabis as a treatment option for a patient. So first of all, you need a chronic disease. Again, and this is what you see when you go through the law coming from a more medical perspective, a lot of, non-fully defined parts. So for example, chronic disease doesn't have a number with it. I think in general terms in medicine, it's about anything that has been persistent for more than 3 to 6 months. Obviously, a lot of these cases, have been suffering from disease for years, maybe even decades. But legally speaking, anything that's chronic, probably you want to put a threshold there at 6 months, because that's when really the symptoms, persist, and patients are defined as a chronic patient. The second one also is complicated because it means it needs to be a severe disease. Again, no catalog, no defined criteria. There's no checkbox where you can say this is 100% defined and this is not. So kind of an in-between area there. The way we approach this is we ask a lot of questions. We ask, on a Likert scale, so that's coming from university medicine, always, from 1 to 10. How does it impact your general life? How does it impact your ability to work? How does it even maybe impact your relationships, private life, etc.? So all these aspects, and when you start asking them, you actually, the patients, I think, take a step back and think about, for example, an ADHD patient. Where do I sense that this is impacting me on a general life? And they often become more aware of their condition, and they also want to get it done and want to get it treated. Severe disease being one together with point 1 and 2. The next one, and I think you've heard about this one before, and again, I want to jump into because looking at that all treatment options need to have been exhausted. It's different from a medical perspective compared to I'm an insurance provider, reimbursement, I'm going to have to pay for this perspective. Those are 2 different things. Because again, no catalog. So let's take, for example, your standard, chronic lower back pain patient. Treatment options, obviously, from the beginning, pain medication, but again, different levels to it. I think there's at least 20 different pain medications going up all the way to opioids, of course. But there's also other treatment options. So looking at rehabilitative medicine, looking at surgery and all these parts. Again, no catalog. So the general consent there, from a medical perspective, from a doctor being able to prescribe cannabis to those patients, is again an informed decision by a doctor. So it doesn't mean you have to check all boxes, doesn't mean every patient has to undergo surgery, every patient has to be treated with opioids for whatever time frame. It just means from a medical perspective, these options have been exhausted in your opinion as a doctor. What's also important here, and then we're going to move on from regulatory, is patients can also, certain treatment options can be unfit for that patient. So for example, telling a patient, hey, the next step, I'm always bringing up the example of a Crohn's disease patient, so a severe inflammatory disease of the bowel, and often a last step in that treatment journey is in surgery, taking out the whole bowel. You cannot force a patient to do that. So you have to talk about that option. You have to put it on a table and say, this would be, what's also maybe in the guidelines. But if a patient says, hey, I want to try out something else that maybe works better, then you don't have to undergo surgery. And we have seen tremendous responses in patients with Crohn's disease who were really unfit to work and under cannabis really started to pick up their work again. So final point, and I think that's the treatment basis for any decision by a doctor, there needs to be a realistic outlook on this could improve symptoms, but that's why it's so important to look at these patients repeatedly. So this is the medical perspectives. Just want to put that out there because it's very much different from reimbursement. I think you've heard about that enough already. There is the way 90% of patients with statutory health insurance in Germany. There is a way for doctors who are registered with a local license with reimbursement to apply for the patient for that process. What we've seen is that it's extremely bureaucratic, and even if you go through it all the way, it may still be rejected in a lot of cases. And that's, the journey doesn't end there because the patient will come back and say, hey, can we try again? So there's cases where, these applications have been filed 5, 10 times. They even sometimes end up on a social court. From a medical perspective, what hasn't happened in all that time frame, the patient hasn't been treated. So you're not only going through all these bureaucratic steps, you actually do not know so far if medical cannabis works in that patient. So the separate way, and I think that has been also the growth pillar for the medical cannabis market and patient prescriptions and demand by doctors in Germany, is privately insured patients or self-payers. And the good thing is that prices have come way down for self-payers at pharmacies. We'll look at that briefly later. But just to really the key takeaway here is, medically speaking, what you can do as a doctor and reimbursement are two separate things in Germany, but they tend to overlap in some aspects, but they are different in many ways. So while a doctor may say this is definitely a good case to be treated with cannabis, a reimbursement agency that has an immense cost pressure may go all the way and take all the steps to not give that kind of pink slip of treatment in that patient. What we also don't know is the actual number of patients. So in Germany, I think cannabis still remains in a way chaotic because there is no central registry that covers all patients. We have some numbers from patients with that type of reimbursement. We do not know the actual numbers of privately insured patients or self-payers. Personal estimated guess is we have about 200 to 300,000 cannabis patients in Germany, but that's just personal opinion, not too much data behind it, unfortunately. And interestingly, the insurance companies, this is one of the leading ones in Germany, also said, this was under a press release that said the hype is over in 2019. So the peak of applications to be reimbursed was in 2019, and the insurances are therefore, I think that gives you a message of how they look at it. For them, it's really a niche topic on the side. There was a little hype because it was new and doctors were starting to prescribe it, but for them, I don't think they paid too much attention, which medically speaking, I think, we're just getting started in seeing the potential of cannabis having the treatment responses. And that's where we came in 2020 with Algea Care to really improve access to doctors, educated doctors, but also look at the patient journey and make it much better because it's still too tedious. And I think it doesn't work if you have to go to a doctor every every couple of weeks, drive there an hour, wait for a couple hours, then there's an issue at the pharmacy and so on. That's what we wanted to change. So very brief overview of what we do at the company. We started in 2020. We have a hybrid model with local practices for onboarding of new patients and follow-up video consultations. I think it's crucial to see these patients frequently, on average every 4 to 6 weeks, because you want to monitor treatment response. So you really want to have the best response, and cannabis is 120 plus strains available in the pharmacies. So if you really go into that rabbit hole and say, we need knowledge and data on all of these strains and not only just 5 or so, then I think it's crucial to see these patients frequently, because you will have better clinical outcomes. You can alter medication, you can add strains. For us, it's, for example, not untypical to have a patient on 2, sometimes 3 different cannabis products, because you want to have something differently in the morning versus the evening, right? You want something that is helping with sleeping in the evening, which is actually a side effect of cannabis, medically speaking, right? But you make use of it therapeutically, but you want something different in the morning, definitely. Working together now with more than 75 doctors in Germany, but we have a long waiting list. I think the crucial, I always hear it's hard. Yes, I'm a doctor also, but it's still hard to work with doctors. I think you really have to be on the same level and talk through what you want to do, how you want to improve care, but how you're going to, from a business aspect, how you're going to make it much better, focusing on tech, focusing on digital pathways, and every single week really also questioning the doctor journey and figuring out what can we do better so that doctors have spent more time with patients and less time with bureaucracy or any other types. Therefore, good patient satisfaction. We started early. I come from academia originally. We started early with scientific collaborations. I'll show one paper that's about to be published very briefly, so we have some data in the room there. But other than that, I think the focus was very much on service, because if you're a local doctor, a local office, the amount of questions you get per patient, even if they are already in your care, is absurd. We estimated around 5 to 6 questions per patient around each appointment. If you're a local doctor, you cannot do that. So it's not like you're just treating a patient, maybe writing a prescription, and that's it for you. I think still to this day, questions with the pharmacies, questions with driving a car, questions with traveling internationally, additional certificates, etc., is still a big blocker to being a cannabis patient in Germany or treating a cannabis patient in Germany. And that's why I think what we see is very few doctors in Germany overall treating with cannabis. We may have a large cohort there. And therefore, education was also crucial, because I think if you have the expectation of we want to know every strain out there, every product available, and we want to have data behind it. That's our advantage. We can now run data queries and see in patients, for example, with lower back pain, prescribed with a certain type, what was the response. And what we see now in the scientific collaborations is that on average, our treatment outcome is better than the German average, looking at the BfArM results. So we can skip that in a way. We're now at more than 15,000 patients treated total, very high rate of recurring patients. I think it was crucial to start with a digital journey. So you can register online and fill out medical questionnaire. We'll dip into that very briefly. What was really the point where we saw early, okay, this is really, I think we defined a standard that was better than what was out there before, when we started having a lot of referrals from doctors, because technically speaking, you wouldn't need this referral sheet right there. But we saw, and these are doctors that we had no interaction with whatsoever, but they heard about us and they decided for themselves and talked with the patient, I think you're a good fit for medical cannabis treatment, but for whatever reason, we heard earlier a little bit, I cannot or I don't want to start that treatment here. I think often it's a lack of knowledge in other parts. I have a slide on that later. But that was the point where we knew, because usually you put just a specialty in there. You put anesthesiologist or psychiatrist or so. That was the point where we saw early on, okay, we have something that also from a doctor's perspective is a new standard. So very briefly, so you understand the German model, again, this is still under narcotics prescription, so it may change in the future. Pretty straightforward, and if anyone tells you can't do marketing, I think you can, but you have to be very, test out different ways, have a lot of legal backup, and figure out how you word these things. But we're visible on social media also a lot. We have the task of every new patient, and hundreds register every day, to get that whole medical history, right? Because that's what you would do if you go to a doctor normally on site. And so that's what we try to do online at your own pace. You can fill in medical questionnaire, upload additional medication, additional certificates or additional documentation for your case. Again, looking at chronic patients, looking at what type of treatment has been done for them already. Then we have a medical screening process. We're starting to incorporate more and more AI actually into that, because we have become pretty good at predicting who would qualify under the current framework and under medical guidelines. But nevertheless, we want to take away the step of you going to a doctor, on site, and then immediately everyone knows, okay, this is not a fit, medically speaking, or you need to try out some other medication before. So we're moving that step earlier. Also means a lot of work for us. No risk, no cost-free for the patient, but still we think better from a patient and also from a doctor perspective. In an exclusion criteria, we heard about a few more. I mean, that's not a completely conclusive list. Every single case, you have to look at it personally, but I think you can prepare a lot of things. We draw the line with certain legal aspects of patients in the past, and also from a doctor's perspective, looking at the risk of psychosis under cannabis treatment. I can tell you that our experience at least has been the number one risk factor for developing psychosis under cannabis treatment is you already have a history of psychosis. And if you single out those cases and are extremely, extremely careful in those cases either, or maybe even take them as a contraindication and speak openly about that with the patient, then I think that as an unwanted side effect, that risk is extremely low. Overall, what we see from the literature also, I think especially from Europe, is that under all these controlled aspects of it, meaning controlled access to it, controlled product, controlled dosage, seeing the patient frequently, I think medical cannabis is an extremely safe medication and often has much less side effects than traditional medication than what these patients have been on so far. Okay, let me just step there. Cardiovascular disease, severe cardiovascular disease being one of the other main contraindications. But again, there is no full catalog or anything. This is just something we developed and have been living with for the last 3 years very successfully. Then we think it's crucial, and also legally think it's important to have a personal insight visit. That's why we have these 18 locations in Germany. But again, focus on service. So for example, I think the average waiting time for an appointment with us is a few days. I think you can shortest is 24 hours. We often have appointments also on a Saturday at noon, for example. So I think breaking with traditional healthcare pathways, where you usually wait for something for weeks and then it's on Tuesday at 8 or something where you're at the office anyhow, is key to indicating to patients, hey, this is a different type of, this is different access. We're focusing really on the patient aspects, and we want to make it easier on all these bureaucratic steps around it. Nevertheless, decision to treat a patient obviously is done by the doctor on site. And what is really loved, I think, by both patients and also doctors is the ability to see these patients during follow-up. Doing video consultations, again, there we have 7 days a week. I think the latest appointments are at 11 p.m. Again, I think if you focus completely on patient expectations and demands, because we are in a privately insured patient or self-payer market, then I think they're really grateful for that. I think overview-wise, this is interesting because if you look at the BfArM data, which is the state agency data, that data is very much focused on in-house patients, so patients in the hospital, in palliative care, etc. And my credo is always, every patient is as important as the other one. I mean, so I think you see a bias there, you see a shift that in that data from the BfArM, you see much less flowers being prescribed, you see a lot of patients dropping out. Interestingly, if you dig deeper, you see that a lot of these patients also drop out because they actually die, unfortunately. So I think that shows you in that in-hospital data, you will see very much different diseases. I think you will have on average worse therapeutic outcomes, of course, because in those patients, everything has been tried and they often have really a very limited quality of life anymore. On such a platform, you see ambulatory patients. So you see patients who are fully working, who have families, who still exercise, etc., but they still have chronic conditions, and that's why what we also ask, and what is also diagnosed from the previous doctors, they often really feel it still every day, but they're not unfit to work or participate in social life, etc. And that's why you see different diseases. So obviously pain being one of the leading ones, but ranging from migraine to lower back pain to post-surgical complications, etc. I think ambulatory diseases, especially inflammatory bowel diseases, so Crohn's disease, for example, depression, anxiety, and especially ADHD, which is a large cohort that is often, from my personal experience with those patients, hyperintelligent, very much aware that they have a medical condition, and their treatment options are exhausted in their early 20s, because besides Ritalin and one other German product in the market, there's really not too much else. And they often have not only an extremely good outcome when they're treated with medical cannabis, they often have experience with it in the past. So they often have, coincidentally, under what circumstances, whatever, realized when they take cannabis, they feel much better. They can actually concentrate better. They're much more focused. Their sleeping schedule gets better, etc. So I think especially those patients, amongst others, have kind of second blossoming, so to say, when they are under a medical cannabis care with fully controlled, product coming from the pharmacies, no synthetic things, etc. Just pharmaceutical grade flower. Really having doctors with vast experience, and not just, hey, I know a few strains, etc., but we know all the strains. I think that's crucial in those patients, because they also challenge you and they read up on it themselves and they come with questions, but they're very thankful when they realize they're really in good hands. And also they have a way that they're not a patient primarily, but also they're a human primarily. So they have all these parts of video consultations, service 7 days a week, etc., that make it easier for them to have this be a part of their life. Sleeping disorder being a very common side effect, I think, a common side disease. I think especially in pain patients, I would say at least every second one has sleeping disorder. And that's interesting about cannabis, because then you can really treat two diseases at the same time with maybe with one type of product, one class of product. So ambulatory diseases, you will see different diseases than what you may have been reading in studies or maybe even official documents or insurance documents in the past. But those patients not only exist, I think they're very much actively looking for a treatment option, and they tend to have the better therapeutic outcome. So very briefly, just looking at the at the time here, a little bit of data I want to share with you. One of those is from internal data. So this is something where patients who apply for that type of treatment. So this is not, actual final patients. This is people seeking for a treatment option, meaning also, a large part of those will not qualify for treatment because, we're on social media also. So you will get, requests from underage patients, you will get from patients who have never seen a doctor, etc. That's the big challenge, I think, of, having a smooth and also quick process of filtering, not only filtering those out, but also communicating with them. What would be the steps to becoming a cannabis patient? What is necessary? Because often they have, of course, a limited understanding of regulatory and medical implications there. But nevertheless, I think it gives a good picture on what are people looking for and where do they come from. Not too much surprises here. This is older data. In the meantime, I think it has become more heterogeneous, and we see more of these other ambulatory diseases. For example, right now, what we're seeing is female diseases, so endometriosis, PCOS, etc. So things where I think your typical OBGYN would not even know about cannabis as a treatment option, but also wouldn't actively suggest it or maybe even offer it. With pain, no surprises there. I think depression and ADHD are diseases that are often overlooked looking at cannabis. We have also one paper writing it finally, also with a larger psychiatric center who analyzed our data for cannabis in treatment of not only depression, but also initially treatment-resistant depression. So patients who have, of course, again, looking at the criteria, have been treated with antidepressants or antidepressant medication in the past and didn't have a good response or too many side effects. And from a daily basis, I can tell you, if you filter carefully, I think those patients often have a very good treatment response when it comes to cannabis, but you need to see them frequently, have to filter carefully, and I think also talk very openly with them about what's to expect, looking at responses, but also potential side effects. ADHD, I already talked about. I think this is one of the really perfect cohorts for cannabis, and that's why I think they often already actively research on that topic as a treatment option. Really quick turnaround from disease to, hey, I'm feeling much better, I would say on average really in the first 4 to 8 weeks, and often because dosages don't have to be that high. I think low side effects, so typical side effects, what patients report unwanted side effects is dryness of the mouth, being sleepy in the evening, which again you make use of therapeutically, and I think especially after 4 to 8 weeks, they often report that they don't feel any side effects at all anymore compared to Ritalin, methylphenidate, and others. That's a big step away from their other treatment options and a huge improvement. Sleeping disorder is interesting because it's something, and this may be your experience also, where patients often come with that main indication or disease and say, this is my main issue really medically. Legally speaking, it should be a concomitant disease because there's often an underlying other organic reason, right? So like a pain disease, etc. So in those patients, it's crucial to look at, okay, what else is going on in this patient? Because sleeping disorder is more of a later stage symptom than the underlying disease, the organic disease overall. And what I always, I'm a big fan of unpopular opinions, and in Germany right now we're talking a lot about recreational markets, and we're talking about people want to smoke weed, etc. And our experience as a patient-centric platform who also asks patients, do you have any experience with cannabis whatsoever in the past? Because from a dosage standpoint, from a medical standpoint, it's crucial. So I think what's good is overall in Germany that we're starting, at least now, but still 2 steps forward and at least 1 step back. We're starting to be more open about cannabis because, I mean, if you're a local doctor, if you're a PCP, a Hausarzt, you should be able to talk about that with patients and, with not too much stigma, even if you don't treat patients with cannabis, etc. But you should know because they're taking something that has a medical impact on them, but they're often very much afraid to share that information. We have heard, especially in the early days, but we continue to hear it, that patients that come to us say, hey, I tried to talk about this topic, medical cannabis, with my doctor, and I was thrown out of the practice and said to never return again, which just medically speaking is just terrible for everybody involved. And so what I'm proposing is, if you dive into and if you actually ask people, well, why are they seeking access to cannabis? Then often, and this is data from the US, and I've seen also data that says 90%, but I'm more conservative, let's say 40 to 50%, that of course, different healthcare system, etc. But if you ask people, they often say, well, I was sleeping better. I didn't have pain that much, or I was actually able to concentrate better. I just could go on with my life. Those are medical indications. So I think what's happening in Germany now is that, and I'll have a slide on that very briefly, we're opening up the medical field for cannabis. I think it's crucial to come away from these extreme cases that are newsworthy, etc. Every single case is important as the others, but I think that the therapeutic outcome is often better in patients who are not hospitalized, but who are working, married, etc. And those are the people that we need to educate in the future, because having the status of a patient obviously comes with many benefits. You can drive a car in Germany legally, you can travel within the EU internationally, you can fly to Spain, have cannabis at the airport, everything. So I think we tend to also in this industry, we tend to simplify things and say, well, that's recreational, that's medical. I think a huge part of recreational is actually medical, but those people have either don't want too much hassle, they think it's very much complicated to become a medical patient, or they think it's more expensive. And I think we are in an interesting situation in upcoming years that both of these things will be at the same level or better than, you know, even black market, etc. And so I think that is the best way moving forward to also generate data on the safety of cannabis. So to have discussions later and say, okay, we opened this up, nothing terrible happened, like, you know, psychiatries are not completely full with cannabis patients. I think that's a better base to move forward, data driven. Very briefly, just results of one study that we're about to publish, final stages now, finally, with the journal. A leading university hospital in Hamburg, looking at patients with neuropathic pain, so that may be diabetic patients, anything that has pain coming from the nerves itself. These are often patients that are very much treatment resistant. So medically speaking, many things you can prescribe them, but often you need at least 3 and it still may not have a great outcome. We just here, you know, not a controlled trial, anything, just retrospective analysis, non-funded. We just gave data and said, make your own decisions on what you make of this. But I think as a doctor, that's bizarre to see that type of treatment response when you put them on a cannabis medication. Of course, controlled, so you have to filter who you prescribe it to, etc. But if you had that as a new pharmaceutical drug, as a pharmaceutical company, you would have a blockbuster. So I think medically speaking, it's interesting to see the potential of cannabis there, not only the quick response to treatment early on, so from baseline within the first 4 weeks, but also that it stays on this level, because usually what you have with other types of treatment options, that it gets worse again further down the road. Of course, just 24 hours of survey here, but we're working on the long-term studies. And I think interesting also, if you look at the co-disease here, sleeping disorder, as I said already, typical pain patient with a sleeping disorder. Again, great treatment response and also good persistence on that treatment. And to finalize up, just so now we talked about Algea Care, and I just want to take very few minutes to talk Bloomwell. So I'm one of the co-founders of Bloomwell, which is kind of the group above it all. 3 main pillars, because we early on decided we need to look at that patient journey holistically, because if you only focus on this part, patient outcome will be limited. And I think it's crucial to improve the whole patient journey so that patients actually stay in their treatment course, because it's not too complicated, it's easy for them, and they can go on with their lives. So crucial, unfortunately the fonts are not, okay, fonts aren't working here. I think you can still read it. Crucial is to understand the pain points of everybody involved. I think lack of knowledge is really a big one. We estimate, and we haven't been corrected so far, that only 2% of doctors or less have ever treated a single patient with cannabis in Germany. That's not that much. Same goes for pharmacies. While legally every pharmacy should be able to, or would be legally required to fill your prescription when you go there, the reality is that I think about maybe 10 to 20 pharmacies in Germany are specialized in cannabis, are able to have the products available, and have also a patient journey that works, meaning they often ship using DHL or overnight services. Because this is different from general healthcare, where you're used to, I can just go to the pharmacy on the corner. In cannabis, it doesn't work. And interestingly, I'm here to share with you, if no one has mentioned so far, that in privately insured patients and self-payers, pricing, there is a legal aspect of it, and there is what pharmacies are actually doing in Germany. And we are now at a level of average prices around 10 euros per gram, and this is the average. So we already have strains at certain pharmacies, at least for certain times, that are below that. So I think looking at Germany wanting to combat the black market, we have a real chance here if we open up medical and looking at the recreational data from 2 slides before, make this accessible to people who are looking for access to cannabis for medical reasons. Lack of data is a big one. As I said, like no one in this room probably knows the real number of patients so far, just estimations. We have particularly built up our data internally in data warehouses because we see every prescription. We are using that for research, we're using that for product development, we're using it for feedback to doctors, because my experience has been with key opinion leaders in Germany. They often have a very anecdotic view on data, but they never zoom out and say, all right, let me just crunch the numbers and see, I've treated 1,000 patients maybe, what were really the outcomes, maybe even strain specific. That's what we can do, and we can also use that to plug that into algorithms to make predictions or maybe even suggestions at a later point, kind of moving into the medical device regulation there, because data is still lacking, but we have a lot of it, and we're definitely going to use it to improve care and also the patient journeys. Because also, if you look at cannabis, so we're still narcotic, meaning we still have paper prescriptions. So while this all looks, I think, easy on a slide, and also looks, I think, relatively easy to a patient, in the back of it, there is a very much scaled logistical process of having paper prescriptions, scans of it sent to patient, paper prescriptions with logistic providers sent overnight to pharmacies, etc. So those things we have built so far, and we will have a much easier life in the future under reclassification. I'll show you in a minute. So this is the overview of what Bloomwell does. Again, looking at a holistic patient journey, starting from telemedicine. What we've launched end of last year was Grüne Brise, is kind of green breeze in German, meaning it's a large cannabis pharmacy platform. Because there was the same issue. Hey, where do I find a doctor? Looking at telemedicine. Why is this not more digital? Where do I have to go, etc.? We built the same for pharmacies. I think that was crucial. Right now, there's 4 pharmacies on there, but many more in the funnel, and also solving a problem for the pharmacy, because for them it's also a big bureaucratic step. If patients just send their prescriptions or just walk in and say, hey, I have this prescription, that doesn't work because they cannot have all product in stock. So really building a digital journey there, launching also an app there in the upcoming months. Algea app is also launching next month, I think. That was crucial. And we have a wholesale platform under the Bloomwell roof, Ilios Santé. And the important task here, and it's not as easy as one may think, is to make sure that the product that 120 plus strains that is being prescribed by doctors who have their own decisions on how to treat patients and what to prescribe. They obviously get education, but I think every strain available in the market has been prescribed by a doctor through Algea Care so far, and obviously also making that product available at pharmacies, and obviously also product development. So I think there's a lot of, once you're working that closely with patients and doctors, you get a lot of input and a lot of great ideas on how you could improve care and come up with new types of applications, come up with new types of products, let's say certain strains, for example, but data-driven, looking at, hey, there's a gap that needs to be filled because doctors actually don't know how to treat that, let's say, small cohort of patients with what's the ideal strain or maybe even extract. And finishing up on this slide to give you a little bit outview on what's happening in Germany. So where we came from also before we started was really no one knew where to go with a doctor. Doctors were shying away from cannabis because once anything was on the web that said, hey, this doctor is maybe treating with cannabis, their phones were just buzzing the whole time and they couldn't continue with their normal doctor's practice. I think especially the pharmacy journeys were also very outdated and pricing was crazy. I mean, we know that, again, focusing on privately insured patients and self-payers, those were often confronted with 25 euros per gram or even more, including, doctor's costs, etc., and long waiting times. So it was not uncommon to really wait for weeks, for getting an appointment, even a follow-up appointment, and then getting the medication from the follow-up appointment, which if you're treating every 4 to 6 weeks, which also from a dosage perspective was normal back then, that could be an issue, right? I mean, there could be gaps in between where you are without medication, and I think that is really one of the blockers for making this a normal treatment option for patients, because it's just too tedious. So what we built in the meantime is really, I think, making it much easier to find a doctor. You're still picking yourself, but you don't have to Google all the time. You can still find us and then just pick your doctor, also regionally speaking, who's in your, not neighborhood, but in your area. I think with the pharmacy platform, it was crucial to have an e-com-like experience on Grüne Brise and also Algea. We have large collaboration projects. You can pay with all credit cards. You can pay with Amex if you want and earn some points. I think that was crucial to bring that really into the, in the current decade at least, because before it was you have to send a bank transfer and it may take a few days, etc. Pricing went down, so this is looking at average. I think we've been lower already, but average, smaller dose, everything included, including medical cost, we're getting there. And so what's happening, what we're seeing presumably next year is reclassification, because we now have 6 years of history with medical cannabis. And like I said, nothing terrible has happened when it comes to overall healthcare or health of the population. That would allow us, of course, it will lower operational costs and efforts for everybody included. So pharmacies, wholesalers, doctors, patients also. Paper prescription going out the window. Germany has been pretty slow with electronic prescriptions, but that would be possible then. So no logistics there anymore, just instantaneous sending of the prescription into the pharmacy. And what we're seeing is also prices are continue to go down, because there's still an oversupply of product in the market, which is good for patients and it's good for doctors also, because I think a patient, who is paying everything together already now at black market prices or lower, will have, like I said at the beginning, 2 points: ease of access, digital journey to knowledgeable doctors, but not feeling like this patient who has to show up there and a god in a white coat says anything to you and maybe only has a few minutes for you. I think it's crucial to have the journey patient-centric, and costs as continue to come down. I think it will actually be below black market or other prices in the future, because there's an oversupply and those margins are gonna decrease. Hope that was interesting for you. Thanks for your attention. Always happy to hear questions or continue later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian.